Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a review of Naomi Novik's Spinning Silver. The premise of it is basically that winter is becoming longer and longer each year, which means crops are dying and they're not being able to live in the kind of human world anymore. There's a lot of poverty and everything like that, and it's kind of trying to get the balance of winter and summer back. This book follows three main characters, I would say, with a few other points of view thrown in there, which I'll talk about a bit more about later. The main one being Miriam, who is the daughter of a moneylender. However, he's a bit of a crap moneylender and lets them go into poverty. So one day Miriam kind of picks up herself and decides that she doesn't want to live in poverty anymore. Her mum's ill. She kind of wants that money back that she's owed and that is owed to her father, and decides to go out and kind of become their family's moneylender, or she takes over her father's role as moneylender and brings back the money. Miriam lives in a small town village near the woods where there's a thing called the Stark Road, which comes at winter, and it's this kind of long silvery road that kind of leads to winter, and the Stark people are kind of the winter fairies. The second character it follows is Irina, who is the daughter of a lord who wants her to marry well. And that's kind of all I'm going to say about her kind of storyline, because all the storylines within the book kind of weave in and out of each other, and it's quite, I think, good to find out how they do that as you're reading, and kind of adds more intrigue, so I don't want to spoil that for anyone. I would say there is a third storyline that's followed by three characters, if that makes sense, on and off throughout the novel. They're not maybe the main characters, but they are quite important. There's a group of siblings. All the storylines kind of, as I said, weave in and out of each other, which is what I find interesting. As when I was starting to read it and get more into it, it was trying to figure out how they were going to all connect in the end, and seeing how they connected in the end. I did find it was quite a slow-paced book. It took a long time to get into it. I started reading this book during the summer, and I got about 300 pages in and then stopped for about 3-4 months, and then I picked up again travelling home from uni and managed to read the last 200 pages throughout that day. It was a whole day of travelling, very long travel day. Yeah, I took the coach home, so I had 6 hours to read this uninterrupted on a coach, and I managed to. So I would definitely say it picks up at the end. Perhaps it was because I was in an uninterrupted, the only thing I brought with me to read on the bus, so I had to read it, but I don't feel like I was forcing myself to read it. I think it did generally pick up a lot in those last 200 pages and made the ending pretty good. The ending, I think, saved it, and it's kind of a pivotal point within it, which isn't too bad since it's 470 pages, so 200 pages is near enough the halfway mark for it to be picking up a pace. I think that pivotal moment could have come sooner, but it wasn't too bad. I have to say, the magic system in this is quite interesting. It's quite confusing to get to grip with at the start, because it's kind of unknown to the main characters kind of what it is, what it deals with, because you're dealing with two kind of species that live in different worlds that kind of cross over in unknown ways and kind of feared ways for the kind of humans who like Miriam. And then there's Irina has another source of magic. It's not a typical magical system. The magic system kind of all revolves around winter and summer, if that makes sense. None of the main characters really have blatant magic. Okay, I can't really say none of the characters have magic, because some of them do, but only in certain places, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's an interesting magic system. It's definitely kind of magical, as in the traditional kind of like whimsical sense. It's not blatantly obviously magical either. I think, to be fair, this cover depicts it quite well. It is a kind of forest spinning magical fairy tale, snowy, wintry kind of thing. So there are a few things about this that I didn't like or expect to not like, if that makes sense. Going into this, I had been told Naomi Novik had beautiful prose and it was very whimsical and magical, which it is in certain aspects, but one of my pet peeves is that it was written in first person, which made following the different characters quite confusing, because there's no headers in the, if I show you a chapter, there's no headers in the chapters, so it could take 2 or 3 pages of reading to kind of figure out who I was following. because it was written in first person, so it's all from the I perspective, and especially with the 3 siblings that are in it, they sound quite similar because as it is written by first person and they are uneducated, they actually learn to like do maths and read throughout the novel. I think Naomi kind of wrote it to reflect that, which made reading their prose actually quite difficult or jarring. It wasn't difficult to read, it's not like difficult language, it just was quite jarring because there was like grammar that didn't make sense, sentences that just didn't make sense, and you kind of had to go back and read them a few times to kind of actually understand what they were saying, and they tended to be quite long because the chapters are quite long in this book. So I just wasn't a big fan of that. I think she could have done it just as well in third person and made those chapters just a little bit easier to understand. The reason I think that I stopped reading this was because the chapter I started at was one of those chapters where I thought it was actually the older sister that was writing it, but then it was actually the younger brother, and I only figured that out when he started talking to the older sister, so I was like, well, that can't be happening unless she's going crazy, which she wasn't. So yeah, I stopped on that chapter because I didn't want to read his chapter, which I think is a bit of a downer for me, but that is a totally subjective point of view. People's writing styles are completely different. People like different writing styles, like that wouldn't bother some people completely, like they probably wouldn't even notice it. It would probably add to the story for them, but for me it kind of detracted from just those chapters. That's probably the only negative thing I have, and it's quite a slow paced book, which is fine if you're wanting to go read a slow paced book. Like sometimes I like that, and I think that kind of adds to the kind of dream-like, unrealistic feel of it. I don't think necessarily making it a faster paced book would have added to it that much. Perhaps. I'm not sure though. It could have. Who knows? I'm not a writer. Or not a very good one anyway. Overall, I think I gave this a 3.5 stars just because it was slightly too slow for me. Those chapters were jarring and I wasn't a big fan of them, but I did love the story, especially the ending. The last 200 pages were really good, made up for it, were much faster paced, had a lot more intrigue in them. Everything was kind of pulled together really well and kind of created a cohesive and overall just quite a good story. Like, I would recommend this to people that read those kind of books. I think I've been used to reading really fast, fantasy paced, like young adult books that are just like event after event after event with characters that aren't perhaps as dry as these characters. There's not a lot of like humour in it, if that makes sense. It's quite a dry book. I don't know if that makes any sense at all. So if you're used to reading like Six of Crows, where it's like lots of humour, like kind of banterist dialogue in it to kind of break up the kind of heavy prose, this doesn't really have that very often. It does have sometimes. So that's why I gave it 3.5 stars. I would recommend it if you were into that kind of thing. Like, if you like the Night Circus, perhaps you'd like this, I would think. And I did like the Night Circus, and I did like this. So, yeah, that's my review of Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik.